Ashley from Atlassian, and I am excited to join Demand Gen Summit to talk about how to build trust with thought leadership. So most of the conversation around demand generation focuses on either demand creation or demand capture. But the underpinning of each of those is trust. And so that's what I want to talk about today. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Edelman Trust Barometer. So this is a longitudinal study that's been run for over a decade, measuring trust in institutions, politicians, CEOs, corporations across the world. And what they found is that people trust people like themselves. And so you can see here, we see that people trust my CEO more than a generic CEO. People trust others in my community more than citizens of other countries or other places in the world. And I trust my coworkers or other technical experts who I've had a personal experience with more than journalists or generic leaders in the community. And this is not just fluffy. This actually informs how people buy, where they work, and who they invest with. So 58% say they're willing to buy or advocate for brands that they trust. 60% choose a place to work based on who they trust. 64% choose investments based on who they trust. And obviously this has impacts for institutional investors as well. And so as we think about this in the context of demand creation and demand capture, we understand that people want to buy from people they trust, and they trust people like themselves. And so organizations have to build that trust with thought leadership before we ever get to bringing people into the funnel or converting them throughout the funnel. So how do we do that? Well, a lot of organizations have something that looks a little bit like this. They've got this top 1% where it's focused on founders or executives or basically fancy titles. And then they've got this bottom 10% of people who are kind of going rogue. Maybe they're speaking or maybe they're posting on LinkedIn. But there's this huge gap in the middle where they don't know how to go from rogue 10% to official company thought leader, spokesperson, someone who's able to build trust. So I want to present a framework today to talk about how we build those thought leaders to build trust, to be able to fuel all of that demand creation and capture. So first, the framework. The goal is to assess our current efforts. Especially if you're in a larger organization, you may have a bunch of people and a bunch of different teams trying to do thought leadership for founders or executives. So how do we know if it's working? Next, we want to create a consistent and holistic plan. So how do we get everyone on the same page? Once we know what works, how do we do more of that throughout the organization? We also want to build a pipeline to scale. So we've seen this a lot, right? That trust gets eroded if there's a scandal or if someone leaves. I hear this a lot as well. What if the person leaves the company? Okay, if you only have one thought leader at the company and they are the person where all of the trust that is built relies on them, that doesn't bode well. If they get sick, if they go on vacation, if they have kids and take leave. So how do we build that pipeline to ensure that we've got multiple thought leaders who can build trust with different types of audiences? And finally, actionable recommendations. So if you've identified an expert in your organization or someone who is great on camera or prolific from a writing perspective, what do you tell them to do to go from that bottom 10% to that top 1%? So I want to share this thought leadership framework, and I want to frame the framework before we get started. First, this is confined to knowledge workers. So this is not about sports stars. This is not about being famous. This is not about musicians. And in this context, it's not about people like lifestyle influencers or Instagram influencers or YouTube influencers. So I come from a SaaS background at a large tech company. And so in my case, this is something where we're focused on B2B sales. And I would suggest that most of you who are in traditional demand gen roles are probably working for some type of B2B company. Next, you need to have a thought. So you have to be coming up with something new or novel or innovating. You have to be iterating and introducing something original. And finally, being good at your job does not make you a thought leader. So there are plenty of people who are making a ton of money for themselves, for their teams, for their companies. But if you're not actually out there sharing that information, codifying those insights, and helping build that trust externally, you're not a thought leader. So let's talk about the pillars. The first pillar is credibility. And this is really, do people believe you when you talk? Are you credible in this topic? Next, having a profile. And this is what a lot of people think about when they think about thought leadership. It's fame. Oh, they're well known. They have a lot of followers. That's only one pillar of being a thought leader. Next, are you prolific? So are you writing? Are you speaking? Are you sharing? Are you crafting books? Are you doing articles? Are you doing podcasts? Are you in multiple different channels to be able to build that audience? And finally, depth of ideas. Now, this is where a lot of people get tripped up because, again, they think, well, we have a lot of smart people. We're doing cool things. Unfortunately, in most cases, teams, companies, and individuals are not codifying that information to share it with others. So it's not just about you having impact internally or for your team. It's about sharing that externally. That's what helps you become prolific in order to build your profile, and making sure that you have that credibility is you've got those depths of ideas that you're codifying. So the pillars work together in tandem, and most people start at the bottom and work their way up. Now, this is the typical profile for someone who is the busy executive, a C-suite level person or a founder. Obviously, they have credibility. They've got a lot of experience in the field. They probably helped create the product. And so they do have that credibility. And in many cases, they've probably been in the field for a while, or they're working with VC firms. They have a large personal network, and so they have a decent profile. But in most cases, these are people they've personally known or worked with. But they're not prolific and they don't have strong depth of ideas. And again, people get tripped up. They're like, no, but they're very smart. They made the product. Yes, but often they're too busy running the company or building the product to actually take time to codify the information and share it. On the flip side, this is what a lot of really strong practitioners look like. This is kind of your internal person who knows and is the go-to person, right? They are very prolific and they actually have strong depth of ideas, and they may even be creating new strategies because they're solving problems every day. But they're low on credibility and they have a low profile because they don't have that amplification and that halo from the company. So I would suggest that this is actually an effective profile. It's very hard to tell someone you have to be a visionary. You have to have a huge title. You have to have the most expertise, right? You can actually be an effective thought leader if you have strong credibility, a strong profile, you're very prolific, and either in the tactical or at the strategic level, you're introducing those new ideas. So potentially influencing other fields or influencing other teams. Now, I'm going to go through these slides very quickly. You're welcome to take screenshots, but there's proof points and tactics to help you improve in each pillar. So from a credibility standpoint, how often do you have to cite your sources versus how often are you treated as the source citation? From a profile standpoint, these numbers may vary depending on the size of your industry and the depth of knowledge and competition in your topic, but you got to be on social media in some form or fashion. It could be LinkedIn, it could be Twitter, could be YouTube. I know a lot of folks are even growing on TikTok, even in B2B, and you do need to be out there speaking, writing, and sharing in some way. You have to get your ideas out there and you have to be known. From a prolific standpoint, again, these are guidelines to help you talk with people internally and equip your teams to help build all of these types of assets. So if you're rarely saying anything, you're out there maybe less than once a month, it's unlikely that you're going to be prolific enough to build that following and get your ideas adopted. So, and again, this counts if it's LinkedIn post, it counts if it's a book, it counts if it's blog posts. And finally, depth of ideas. And this piece I want to call out here is making sure that you're giving time to people to run experiments, to document those experiments. You give other teams the opportunity to test frameworks or tactics that other teams have used. And then you're putting that out into the world as the thought leadership to say, we've done this, we have this expertise, we've done something new, and now we're going to share it with the world. So once you've gone through and assessed the people that you think could be thought leaders for your organization to build that trust in the market, how do you support them? So there's two approaches. One, you can build a narrative. The other is to build a person. So in the case of building a narrative, this is something where you may look and say, this is where we have credibility from an industry or market standpoint. We're going to build out the story and take some people who maybe already have that credibility or that fancy title, and we're going to use this narrative to help them build their profiles. The other way to do this is to build the person. So if you have someone internally who already has started to build a following, now you just need to help them shape that toward the company goals. So you could start with the person or the narrative. I would suggest that actually marrying the two is going to be the fastest way to build that thought leadership because you're leveraging the trust that these people have already built with their audience. So how do you come up with your narratives? I would suggest that you need to look at it at 3 depths: conceptual, strategic, and tactic. And so at the conceptual depth, you're talking about the what and the why of the idea. You're helping the audience think about and understand the problem space. At the strategic level, you're going to focus on the process, tools, and key knowledge components you need to make that idea reality. So you're going to help people think about and understand the solution space, and you're going to equip them to do their own research. And finally, at the tactical level, this is super prescriptive, step-by-step instructions, everything they need to do regularly to make the strategic and conceptual ideas reality. Now, you'll notice that nowhere in there did I say, make them aware of your product, make them aware of your solution, make them aware of how to implement your solution. That happens after you've created demand and captured demand. That's a use intent, not a trust intent or a learn intent. And so, for example, if we go all the way back up to the Edelman Trust Barometer that I showed at the top of this presentation, Edelman is actually a public relations firm. But that report gets cited and used by a number of people in a number of different industries, whether they're clients, whether they're customers, whether they're in the market for a PR firm, because they understand that they're actually in the business of fostering trust and relationships. And so they have that credibility to put out this report. They've now been doing it for many years, so they're quite prolific with it. And they've got the depth of ideas because they provide action that has nothing to do with, and hire Edelman PR to help you build trust, right? So if we think about it, that's an example from this presentation of this conceptual, strategic, and tactical depths. Next, outlets and influencers. So anyone that I work with internally or externally, I tell them, you've got to put down who else you want to be connected to, where you want to present, or where you want to write. And I specifically tell people not to put down big outlets like Reuters or the New York Times or Harvard Business Review. Yes, everyone knows those publications. And in a lot of cases in B2B, those are tier 1 publications that everyone is striving to get into. But it's really hard to build trust with the people at those publications because there's such high competition. And your audience might not actually be there when we start to think about this in terms of connecting with an ideal customer profile. So go niche. What are the niche conferences where your ICP and your peers are attending and fostering those relationships? Who are the influencers and brands that you can actually be connected with to be able to exchange that trust and have that mutual exchange of value? And finally, your personal brand. So as we discussed, people trust people like themselves, which means that you need to be showing up in an authentic way. So from a voice and tone perspective, do you write in long sentences? Do you aim to be inspirational? Are you sarcastic? Do you curse on stage or in writing? What clothing do you wear? Do you have a signature look like the Steve Jobs turtleneck or a trucker hat? And this is something I find, especially with a lot of the engineers I work with. They sit down and they say, I'll write whatever you want me to write. I'll wear whatever you want me to wear. I'll say whatever you want me to say. That's not the point. If I, as a marketer, force you to read a script and become a corporate shill, I've obliterated the like themselves, because people can't trust you if you're not showing up authentically. If you're nervous or you're hiding behind a mask or a facade, they're not getting that authentic interaction. And so as you work through these things, you need to be honest about who you are, what you want, and how you're going to get there. Next, setting up social media. So we audit existing channels and activities. In our case, from a B2B standpoint, LinkedIn is a very important channel. I frequently see headshots where people are looking off in the distance, or maybe their head's cut off, right? So you want a profile picture that looks like you and gives off the personality that you just described in that personal branding section. So you'll address those gaps with potentially a new headshot, potentially a new cover photo. And then we have a process and training for ongoing engagement. So how often are you posting something original? What's the mix of links versus carousels versus text posts? And then how are you connecting and commenting and having conversations with others in your industry to really build those relationships and foster that trust? Next, speaking engagements. So you have to develop an abstract and key takeaways. These are pretty much key for any place that you submit to, and you want to be cognizant of the time and effort that it takes to create a quality submission. So you don't want to do that on the fly. Start with that as a foundation. Then once we get accepted, we have content coaching and slide deck reviews, and in some cases, speaker coaching. Now, this could just be with your peers. It could be with your comms team. Ideally, it would be with someone from your ideal audience, particularly if you're trying to frame up a brand new idea that's new to your industry. Now, this slide is intentionally overwhelming because if you're at a larger company or maybe you work with an agency, there's a lot of people in the mix. You've got the comms team and the editorial team, the social media team, and an admin who's booking. It can be a lot. And I want to highlight the individual here because as we think about building that trust and we think about those relationships that ultimately do lead to demand creation and demand capture, it has to be from the individual. They cannot just outsource all of the thinking and all of the writing and all of the publishing. They have to be involved. Now, once they've created a significant body of work, yes, it's much easier for someone else to take that work and repackage it, but they've got to be involved. Otherwise, they're not a thought leader. So how do we put this into practice? First, talk about the problems you solve. Now, I want to be clear here. This is not just problems that you solve with a product perspective, right? There's sales, there's the demand creation side from a problem perspective, there's the capture side from things like nurture campaigns and deal cycles, right? But at a high level from a thought leadership standpoint, what is the overarching problem that you're trying to solve? So one of my colleagues actually talked about this at the beginning of COVID. He was implementing a lot of travel policies, leave policies, and reimbursement policies to make sure that our employees were safe. And so he wrote a blog post about that and then ended up getting invited to a panel to speak about that. And so again, he's got that credibility because he's actually solving this problem. Next, pair two or more people. So this was a tactic we used at Duarte. Nancy Duarte is the author of Resonate, Slideology, the Harvard Business Review Guide to Persuasive Presentations. And so she already had a name, she already had a following. And she co-authored the book Illuminate with our Chief Strategy Officer, Patty Sanchez. And Patty is very smart, very experienced, but she wasn't well known. And so people frequently came and said, hey, we want Nancy to speak. And we'd say, oh, actually, this is Patty's area of expertise. And they were like, well, we don't know Patty. No problem. Let's pair them together. So they started doing joint bylines. They co-authored the book. They started doing speaking gigs together. And eventually, Patty was able to start securing her own bylines because she had that halo of credibility. And finally, start with friendly channels. So we did this for Atlassian. He is now the CTO at Benchling. His name is Stephen DC, and he has a lot of expertise in how to build engineering teams, how to scale them, and how to think through that structure. And so we worked with one of our partners at InVision to have him appear on a podcast, and we also had him start publishing on the company blog. And then we were able to repurpose that content into multiple channels. So we had a speaking engagement at San Francisco Dev Week. That then gave him fuel to post on social media. And then we were able to start publishing his articles, reposting them on LinkedIn with the backlink to Atlassian. So again, yes, he is very smart. He helps build all of our products and he is recruiting, but at a high level, he was speaking about how to build engineering teams and how to scale them to solve complex problems. So I love this quote from Dory Clark. She's an author and a professor at the Duke Fuqua School of Business. And she says, you have something unique to offer by dint of who you are. Even if something in theory has been said before, it hasn't been done by you in the way that you can do it. It's time to step forward and recognize that you can make a contribution. And so as you're thinking through all of your demand gen activities, strategies, and programs, hop up a level and remember that building trust through thought leadership is the fuel for all of those programs. Thank you so much.